Now, our topic today is, as I said, two topics: using Python, how that's used, and learning a little bit about that for those who don't know much about it, or those who just want a refresher, and a bit on how we might use cultural diversity to our advantage. There'll be Q&As after each session, and at the end I'll ask our branch chair, Kogi Oberoi, to give us a short closing address. So now I'd like to pass over to our young member, Gerald, who will moderate the first section. Gerald, over to you.
Thank you, Andy. Our first talk for today will be creating awareness in Python programming. So our first speaker will be Nicholas Chen, who has been a successful marine propulsion engineer, a training manager with SMRT, and now has diversified again into curriculum development. He is an expert in the use of Python in many different applications. Now let's put a warm welcome for our speaker, Nicholas Chen.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Hi, Nicholas here. So I'm pleased to be the first speaker for today's webinar, just to make sure that all of you can see me and hear me. Okay, let me just share my slides. Just let me know if you can see my slides. I'll just put to presentation mode. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I realized that I only have 30 minutes, so I came up with some posters just to align everyone. So a preamble to today's presentation is that as an engineer, we often have to maintain a balance between the engineering theory as well as the tools that we use in our day-to-day work. Okay. The tools that I'm referring to is actually programming tools. So in short, going to bring all of you and provide some insights into the Python program. So this is the new sexy in the programming world. Okay. So I believe that all of you have seen this poster, just some objectives. Okay. So for today's session, it's just an overview and some of the Python's library. And also I'll show you some applications on how it can be done for data science. Okay. So this is a hot domain that everyone is trying to come into. Okay, so I believe that the moderator has given some presentation for myself. Okay, I will not cover much. Okay. So why Python? I believe that all of you have tried using C++ as well as Java. For myself, I was a previous user of JavaScript. So we realized that often we have to remember the syntax. Okay. Then at times we also have to make sense of the API. Okay. However, for Python, it's more human-like, I would say, based on my exposure to it. And at the same time, it's supported by a huge community of developers. Henceforth, there's actually a wide selection of libraries that you can use for. Okay. Unfortunately, for other programs, some of them encounter a natural death because there isn't much support from the community. Okay, but on the contrary, Python have a different predicament. Okay, there's actually a lot of useful libraries and APIs that you can use. Okay. Okay, so I'll introduce probably NumPy, Pandas, as well as Quantlip. So these are the three main libraries that is used by Python. Okay. This is actually one very common one where numbers are actually arranged into array. So I will cover all these in my next slides. Okay, you are also able to group data into a meaningful way. In this case, I'm trying to group them together to find the mean of all these values. Okay, and of course, some plotting features that all of you can use for. Okay, I believe that all of you will have realized that because of Python, it makes data visualization more apparent, okay, to the audience or the end user. Last but not least, there will be two examples in the form of demonstration. I'll be using a Jupyter notebook. Okay. Before I move on to the next slide, if you can look at this word Jupyter, this is actually a combination of Julian, Python, Py, and R. Okay, it's a combination of the three upcoming languages that's used by most programmers now in the modern day context. Okay. Okay. So point number one, I would say that programs in the past are very lengthy and you have to remember a whole chunk of syntax. But for the case of Python, it's totally different. Okay, it's more human-like. The syntax are easy to read and it's easy to diagnose. Okay, when it comes to large program. Okay, and of course, I believe that when all of you are doing your different analysis, you realize that your data are often unstructured. So Python has actually a wide array of data structures and support for larger data to be analyzed. Okay, and in fact, if you are a frequent user of Dropbox, okay, the back-end development of Dropbox is done through Python. Okay, this will be interesting. Later, I'll be showing you a demo of what I mean by cells, which means that you can divide your programs into cells, okay? And that can be used by other programmers. Okay? And you can, in fact, store all your programs onto GitHub. GitHub is actually an online repository for codes. It's free for all. So if you're interested, you can go on to GitHub and create a free account for yourself. At this juncture, before I move on, is there any questions with regards to why Python is widely used? Okay, if there are no further questions, I will move on to the libraries. Okay. Okay. So in the human world, 4 is just a 4, but in the computing world, it's totally different. Okay, a 4 without a decimal at the back is what we call an integer. Okay, and if you have a decimal at the back, is what we call a float. Okay, the last two, especially this one, okay, you realize that I purposely remove one of the quotations, so that will result in an error. Okay, whereas for the last entry, okay, I have both the front and the end quotation, and that actually gives me a string. Okay, so it's very important to realize that when you're doing programming or in the mind of a computer, they treat the same data differently depending on how you structured your data. Okay, just an example, figure 1. Okay, so you can realize that your data can be arranged in the form of an array, whether it's 1 by 3, 2 by 2, 2 by 1. Okay, so NumPy, in short, NumberPython is responsible for this, and it's a useful library, which I will demo in my last slide. Pandas, okay, not the one that you see in the zoo. Okay, this is actually Pandas data analytic tools. Okay, it's for data manipulation and analysis. So I have an example right here. Okay, figure number 2. Okay, just a quick question. You can unmute yourself. Did anyone observe any outliers based on the data? Does anyone want to just unmute yourself and share with everyone online? Okay. I would say that of note, okay, you realize that the data set actually has an age that is 154. Okay, that is quite unlikely. So this is what we call an outlier. Okay, and the other point is for someone to earn $3 million per year, that is okay, uncommon. Okay, but in fact, when you present your data set, that is in fact what we call an outlier. Okay, so Pandas will give us some insights to how these data are structured, okay, and provide an easy alternative to sieve out all these outliers. Quantlip. So this is a model that I was doing previously with my team. Okay, we are supposed to predict container volume. So our objective is 1 week in advance. Okay. So Python actually provides a wide array of plotting tools, ranging from histograms, box plot, all the way to bar chart. Okay. So in this case, it's a machine learning model using linear regression. Okay, as you can see that the red lines are all my training data. Okay, and my green dots are all my testing data. And our objective is to predict container volume 1 week in advance, which is 7 days. Okay, to allow the operation teams to plan out their schedule. Okay, as you know that for a pod, they are running 24/7 operations. Okay. This is the demo. Okay, the yellow box indicates Python 3. So that is the new format for your Jupyter notebook. So later you should see something of a similar fashion. Okay, and this is what I meant by a cell. Okay, so if you draw reference to all the way to the end, IN in fact means the output, the input of a particular program. Okay, so I come to the end of my presentation. Okay.
All right, thank you, Nicholas. I definitely enjoyed.
Yeah, so I have actually a demo to show
Okay,
everyone.
can.
Yeah.
No problem.
Okay, so let me just draw my file. Okay. Okay, let me just. Can all of you see my Python file? Okay, just give me a minute. Okay, it should be up. Okay. Are all of you able to see my file? Okay, cool. So there'll be 2 examples. Okay, let me just remove all my output. Okay, what all of you should see is that in fact all the input. Okay, for demo number 1, I'll be using NumPy and Pandas. Okay, so the purpose is to show you how NumPy and Pandas are loaded as libraries. Okay, so this is my first cell. Okay, so let me just try to run it. Okay, then after which I'm going to use a random number generator. Okay, and let's print out the file. Okay, so I'm using the random number generator feature from NumPy. Okay, so this is something that you can do in your free time. Okay, if you don't have a equivalent data set. Okay, so I'm actually creating 10 rows of data. Okay, followed by 5 columns. So remember that when it comes to indexing, right, a computer must always start from 0. So it's 0 to 9 and 0 to 4. Okay, something interesting, you realize that there is both positive and negative values. Okay, and we'll be interested to take a look at some statistics. So all these are actually pre-programmed for you. You just need to draw out the relevant libraries. So in this case, I'm going to run the data set. Okay, so there are 10 values in each column, which is correct. Okay, it's able to draw out the maximum and the minimum value. So in this case, for the first column, right, okay, 2 would be the maximum value. Okay, it's all done nicely for you. Okay, and you realize that the syntax is called describe. Okay, more human-like. Okay, you don't have to go and remember. Okay, you can also draw out all the different index. So in this case, I'm trying to find the index for the maximum value. Okay, in this case, for column 0, it's actually referring to the value 2. Okay, so simple indexing that all of you can use in your day-to-day work if you want to find the maximum and the minimum value. Okay, so input 9 and input 10 are actually trying to find out the indexing for the different values. Okay, so this part, example number 1, I'm done. Okay, I hope there are no questions. If that is the case, then I'll probably go to example 02. Okay, these are the other features of Python. Okay, you don't have to remember much of the syntax. You can just run. Okay, LS Magic. Those that are familiar with programming, then you should be quite familiar with the word LS. Okay, so these are all the magics that's done for you. Okay, but just take note that Python by nature, likewise for any other program, you should not have a space. Okay, so in fact, I introduced an error. There's a space here, okay, which the program is able to detect. Okay, and you realize that I'm trying to run a HTML file. Okay, so this is another program that I've been using. It's called Spider. Okay, so you can see that for Python, it's very versatile and includes a wide range of libraries that you can tap upon. So I'm just going to run a simple file. You can have a look. It's a 3-minute video. Okay. So it's quite intelligent. Okay. Just going to fast forward. Okay. Okay. So I'm not going to run the entire file, just to show all of you the power of Python. So I've done with my demonstration using example 01 and 02 as an example. Okay, cool. I think I'm done. All right. Okay, let me just stop sharing. Okay, so I've stopped sharing.
All right. Thank you, Nicholas, for the wonderful talk. I think that some of our participants are very keen to start trying out Python now. Okay, so now we'll be moving on to our Q&A session where you guys will be asking us questions. If you guys have any questions, please fill them in the chat room. And if you have any questions that you'd like to direct to any of our panelists, you can actually put their name in the question. So we have first question. The first question is, who manages the GitHub so that it does not get cluttered? This is by Bhushan Oberoi.
Okay. It's an interesting question. I do have a few repository on GitHub. I would say that since it's free for all, they will try to give as much space required by the user. Yeah, because I don't usually meddle much with GitHub. I only have like about 10 programs on GitHub. So as to who manages GitHub, probably I have to go and search for the answer and probably get back to the audience. Yeah, but he has a valid point. He has a valid point because eventually it will suck up a lot of data. Oh yes, I just need to caution everyone, if you happen to use Python, right, just take note that it actually sucks up a lot of memory from your computer. Okay, so if you happen to run any other programs, my recommendation is to shut them down. Okay, because Python actually requires a lot of memory space. Okay.
All right, thank you for the answer. Is there any other questions? Okay, we have a question from Mr. Andy actually. Can you give some more examples of the uses of Python in industry?
Industry, I would say your model, regardless whether it's a linear regression model or because we are trying to do some prediction. Okay, so Python can be used to house all these data. Okay, Excel by nature is limited. Okay, so the data set that I'm using actually has 2 million data points. Okay, that actually breaches the limit of Excel, because when you use Excel, right, if you go beyond 1 million, right, all your data will be truncated. Okay, henceforth, a lot of companies are actually relying on Python or even R to manipulate and make some sensing of their data sets. Okay, machine learning is one of them. I would say the other one will be your AI. Okay, all your AI requires a lot of data set in the form of training and testing data. Okay. Yeah, so these are some examples.
Okay, next question by Mr. Kogi is, container volume is for whole pod with full and partially full containers?
I would say our analysis cover both parts, so there's actually full and partially full containers. Okay, empty containers, they do come because previously I was in the marine line, So they are empty containers that come into PSA to unload so that they can do some loading and move on to the next port of call. Difference between MATLAB and Python. I would say Python is more powerful. Okay, it actually gives you more plotting features. Okay, Matplotlib is one of them. Seaborn, I think, is the new kid on the block. Okay, you can go and have a look. Since this is a question from Warren. Yeah.
Let's keep the questions coming. Any more questions put in the chat box? I think Mr. Nicholas is really excited to answer all your questions.
Yeah, so I would say data visualization is now an important feature because for us engineers, trying to tell a story is often difficult. Okay, so making use of whatever features that's available on Python will help us to bring the message across. Yeah.
We got another question by Mr. Chin Chi. How are the libraries in Python validated before being published?
Oh, Python actually has their own committee. So it's Python is a freeware. So all these will have to go through the Python group. Okay, you can go and have a look. And for each library, right, you can actually do a command to find out who is the author. Okay, and they will have tested backend before it's even being published. Okay, ultimately, it's for the greater good of the programming community. Okay, I've just listed the tip of the iceberg. Okay, so during the demo, I just highlighted a NumPy, this Matplotlib, and the last one would be Pandas. There are in fact a few thousand libraries that you can actually use depending on your requirement and your business case.
All right, any more questions? Do feel free to put it in the chat box. I think Mr. Nicholas is here to answer the questions.
Interesting questions. I think it has been quite some time since I used MATLAB. Maybe Python give me more flexibility. That's why I am putting MATLAB into the closet for now. Okay, so Python is a freeware, so you can download the individual versions. For corporate, they are using the corporate version, which actually exposes them to more libraries.
Okay, I think if you got no more questions, we can move on to the next speaker. If any questions, do feel free to put in the chat box. I think Mr. Nicholas will be here all the way to answer the questions. All right.
Okay, thank you very much, Gerald. Thank you for moderating. I also know as a young guy, you have to rush off now to a graduation ceremony. So we'll say thank you very much for helping us this evening. And we look forward to your future participation with the student chapter at SIT and University of Glasgow in the future. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Bye.
If there are any more questions on Python, please do put them in the chat box. It's not just used for engineering. I learned from my son who does bioinformatics at Exeter University that he uses Python for analyzing biological experimental data, presumably for the same reason, masses of data to analyze. So it's not just used in engineering, interestingly, very versatile. Anyway, now I would like to pass over to Ben, who will be moderating the next segment of our webinar this evening. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Andy. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our series of talks. As Andy's mentioned, we're departing from our normal technical-based talks and going to some of the softer subjects, obviously not those that are less important, any less important in today's world, which brings us on to the next topic. Diversity has been an emerging trend in many corporate settings for quite some time. The benefits have always been observed when comparing different industries, companies, teams, and locations. It's an important factor to us as it brings together people with different perspectives and viewpoints, and it's always more important to have a look at that from when trying to solve problems today. And it's one of those things where you look around us at the moment, the people that are presenting today, you look at the range of different backgrounds, ages, and I'm not really sure whether I fall into the mature or the emerging group here. So I'm going to leave it to the elders to tell me a little bit more about that. But certainly when you bring together a bunch of individuals that have different viewpoints, you can often solve problems more effectively together, forming those different viewpoints, having that discussion and generating really healthy debates with that. Part of my day job, I work with a global team, and it's really always very helpful to bring people together of different ages, backgrounds, and viewpoints to come together and solve global issues, which I've hinted at as the next theme as well. When you look at globalization, which has been a buzzword really since the 90s, which is before some of us have joined the workforce or may even have been born, looking at some of the younger members on the call today. However, it has been an important an important part of our journey to becoming a more diverse society. Our next speaker, Pradeep Mathur, brings over 3 decades of experience of working in different countries and managing diverse teams. He's conducted business in over 5 continents and managed teams based in many countries, and he's going to share us a little bit of experiences and navigating the issues via examples and anecdotes. He's also presented me with the honor of actually running through the slides, so I will get the slides up, and Pradeep, over to yourself.
Hear me now? It's still unmuting.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, then many thanks, Ben, and many thanks to Bhushan and IME for giving me an opportunity to talk to you on this forum. And thanks, Ben, for your kind and generous words, because I hope I can do some justice to it. I was asked by Bhushan a couple of months ago to share my experiences and insights for working in different countries for a very long time, for 35 years. I'm an Indian, but for the last 35 years, I have lived and worked in 6 countries outside India, and I've done business in over 50 countries. I have run large international teams with different nationalities. At one time, I had about 24 nationalities in my team when I was working from London. What Andrew and Ben, I have never told them that I do have to manage diversity in my own home too. I have 3 daughters. One is married to French, the other is married to a Dane, the third is married to a Dutch. Now you can imagine I've got 5 grandchildren, and they are all bilingual. You can imagine how I manage the diversity, and I do have some claim of being able to do it fairly successfully because all my daughters are still married, and I get along. Today, I will not be speaking of anything technical or profound. I'm a little intimidated by the talk which went before me. I don't have anything technical to say about that, as equal to that. I'm sure that all of you have experience of working with different nationalities and doing it successfully. I'm not a management guru. I'm not a management guru. I don't have an MBA. I will mostly share with you my experiences and in my simple day English, because I learned a long time ago that works better. And I'll leave it to you to draw your own conclusions of what you think is relevant and not relevant to your own particular situation. Can I ask Ben to insert the second slide, the context? Let me start with an anecdote. In a year 2000, I said that I will be speaking mostly about anecdotes and my own experiences. In year 2000, I went to Brazil. I was heading project finance for Deutsche Bank at that time, based in Singapore. I'm still in Singapore. And I was accompanied by my colleague from Japan. And we had gone to Brazil to talk to Petrobras, the oil giant, about their financing requirement for about $600 million oil and gas pipeline, offshore oil and gas pipeline. I went and met the CFO, Roberto Alvarez, in Rio. when we got over the sort of preliminaries in terms of, okay, good to come you and this and that, how do you find this? Hey, he exclaimed, he said, I find it very interesting that you are an Indian, you are working, you're living in Singapore, you are working in a German bank. Your colleagues are from Singapore, from Japan, and from Brazil. You have come to Brazil to discuss with an oil company of Brazil, coming to discuss the financing schemes of Japan, Korea, and Italy. And he says, now I understand, really understand what globalization means. That, for me, was a very apt description of what a global workplace we have now. The global nature of our workplace today arises from, you might be working in a different country, you might be working in a multinational, you might be working in a company which has very global connections where you have to deal with many different nationalities. You may have supply chains extending to different countries. You may be managing export oriented your clients for export in different countries. And if you really look at Singapore as an island, most of the major companies in Singapore are a global workplace. They fall in that definition. And what that means is interaction with different nationalities and different cultures. And what this implies is that you have to manage the diversity and that culture if you want to succeed. Now, diversity, I mean, I have heard a lot about diversity in my 35 years, including in Singapore. You see that in Straight Times all the time. Diversity arises from behavioral responsibility from our own perceptions. It's not something, given. It arises from our own perceptions, and our perceptions are filtered. They are influenced by our own culture, the own views about stereotypes, and our experiences. We tend to categorize information and we tend to interpret it based on our own experience, and then we form a judgment. That judgment is often biased. And that judgment can create issues. Can we have the next slide, please, Ben? Slide 3, dialogue. I describe it with a dialogue between a Greek and an American colleague. Now, oh yeah, it's coming. On the left-hand side, you have the words which were spoken. On the right-hand side, you have the perception of the two nationalities. The American says, how long will it take you to finish this report? And the perception of the American was, I am asking him to participate in this. And the Greek says, his behavior makes no sense. He's the boss. Why doesn't he tell me? So the Greek says, I don't know. How long should it take? American's perception is, he's refusing to take responsibility. And the Greek feels, I asked him for an order. Why doesn't he give me an order? The American then says, you are in a best position to analyze the time requirement. And he feels that I'm trying to press him to take responsibility. Greek feels, okay, nonsense. This is nonsense. Let me give him some time. Doesn't matter. So Greek says 10 days. American's perception is it is not going to be done in 10 days. He lacks the ability to estimate the time. His time is totally inadequate, so I'll offer him 15. So he says, take 15. Is it agreed? You will do it in 15 days. Now, as far as the American is concerned, he thinks I offer him a contract. I have given him a way out. Whereas the Greek thinks that this is an order now. I have to do it in 15 days time. So that's a difference. The same statements were made But there were two very different interpretations coming out of the different cultures, the American culture, which is very direct culture, and the Greek culture, which is very hierarchical. And how they were interpreted and how it worked. The same damn thing could have been done in 10 days or 12 days or 15 days. I don't know. So my theme today is, the theme of my talk today is how to manage this interaction and be successful. Can I have slides 4 and 5 then? 4 first. Pardon me, I am I am the old school. I am not so very confident about my ability on this. This is a real case example. Coca-Cola decided to launch a new product, and they decided to sell it in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia. They sent their high-powered salesman over there. He went there, spent 1 year, tried all sorts of ad campaigns and all that. Came back, and he looking very down. One of his friend asked him, "What happened? Why the long face?" The salesman said, "I failed. The campaign was a total failure, despite the fact that I spent a huge amount of money on the ads." "Why is that? I thought you were very good at ad campaigns. You excel in that." He said, "Look," the salesman said, "Look, I was very confident that I would make a great sales pitch, but since I did not know Arabic, I plan to convey the message visually using images." Then next slide. So he put up 3 images. You can see on the left, the first image is a guy lying in desert, exhausted, almost comatose. Then he stands up and drinks Coca-Cola. And then third image is he starts running. So the friend said that, "Look, this is great. He said, the salesman said, "Look, we plastered it all over Saudi Arabia. Every road you go, every corner you go, these images were there." Slide 6, please. So you couldn't go anywhere without seeing them. And then the friend asked me, "Terrific, but why didn't it work?" He said that, "Look, somebody forgot to tell me that in Saudi Arabia, they read from right to left. Now, when you read from right to left, the guy is running, he drinks Coca-Cola, and then he's lying flat on the sand." Now, the basic thing is that salesman from Coca-Cola failed because he was not aware of some of the basic facts. That ignorance cost Coca-Cola an enormous amount of money and a failure. So within the theme which I have picked today, my first theme is know the country. Slide 7, please. Whenever you interact with another country for business, I'm going to talk only about the business. I'm not going to talk about anything else. It is important to do the basic due diligence about the country. The people, the history, the geography, the language, the religion, the cultural practices, and their customs. If you do that, it will save you from many pitfalls and ensure success. I can say it with experience. As I told you, I did business in 50 countries across the globe, as far apart as Chile and Brazil to Romania and Russia and Japan, South Africa and Mozambique and Iran, of all the places. Whenever I visited a new country, I would read up about it. Now, my time is before the Google and Wikipedia. I used to buy travel guides, and sometimes I would read, most of the times probably, I would read them on the plane. I ended up with a collection of about 50 travel guides and that was a big issue because we didn't know where to store them. I donated them all to the American Club. In the same way, when you have a colleague coming in from another country, or you have to deal with a colleague from another country, it may be worthwhile to read up about that country. so that you can understand their reactions. You can understand their reactions to your statements and what you do. And the questions you ask are shaped by the reactions of your culture. It saved me a lot of grief and I produced very good results. Actually, in my team, I used to tell them, I said, look, when you go to a new country for a, say, 1 week vacation or 10-day vacation, you read travel brochures or you buy travel guides and read. Why don't you do the same due diligence for 1 hour or 2 hours, same amount of time? Invest time in that and read about it. It will help you. Many people did, many didn't. The corollary to all of that is also know thyself. Your own perceptions are shaped by the culture you come from. And the cultural influences of your country, the practices in your country, and the most importantly, the general perception of your own country people to the other people. Let me give you an example. Koreans versus Japanese, Indians versus Chinese, American versus Mexicans, to name a few. Each has a view about the other. If you are aware of your own biases, you would know how to react about the other person, and you will be able to navigate the interaction much better. I mean, that has been my experience always. Can we have the slide, next slide? Or hang on for a second. I was the CEO of Chase Manhattan Bank in China in 1992. That's a long time ago, about 30 years ago. Most businesses were making a beeline to China at that time. In the most boardrooms, the question was not why are you in China, but question was why are you not in China? So most CEOs and CFOs of S&P 500 or the major European companies would come to China. And Chase Manhattan Bank was one of the prime international bank apart from Citi. So most of them will visit both of us. The head of Citibank was also a very good friend of mine. They will visit us for general information about China, financial, this. Now, it was very common that when these CEOs or CFOs entered the meeting room to meet with me, or I entered the meeting room to meet with them, there'll be suddenly a look of surprise on their faces, started look on their faces. They did not expect an Indian in 1990s to head an American bank in China. And many times, believe me, not once, at least 50, 100 times, I heard them blurt out, oh, we also love Indian curries. Now, the point was that I am a CEO of a bank. I'm not a chef. But at that point in 1990, the Indian curries were more famous or popular than the Indian CEOs. I mean, that's changed now. There are many more Indian CEOs than it was there. But that was then in 1990s. And that's what I call stereotyping. And my next slide is stereotyping, which I'll discuss now. Ben, can we have the next one? 8. Most stereotyping arises from the generalizations that we as individuals or collectively as societies do. Let me give you an example, and please, no offense to anyone. No offense. I do not know what is the nationality of the audience. No offense. These are some of the generalizations. Indians love to bargain and they are very argumentative. I am argumentative. Americans are aggressive and rude. Hong Kong Chinese are very commercial. Singaporeans are risk averse. Now, these are all generalizations and a matter of perception, but many times they form the basis of our interactions whether true or not. We categorize people in buckets. Those who do not fall in the home bucket can get miscategorized, and you can form a judgment which is not exactly true. Let me give you an example again. Suppose there is a conference of engineers taking place in Singapore. An Indian walks in. I can bet, I will be happy to say if anybody disagrees with that, I can bet that the first knee-jerk reaction would be, oh, he must be a software engineer. Because most engineers outside India today are software engineers. There are many other engineers also, chemical, mechanical, whatever. Just for your information, I was in IIT. I also was selected in IIT Kanpur. But in recent times, that's true, and that's where the stereotyping forms. Am I correct in my my observation? Any comment on that? To give you an example how this stereotyping can impact your business, and it can impact very seriously, plus or minus. When I joined Chase Manhattan Bank in 1989, I joined them in derivative group, and at that time, Chase had done almost zero business in India, and so had most of the foreign banks. Zero derivative business in India, and so had most foreign banks. One of the reasons was the stereotyping, because the stereotype which I heard was the Indian corporates or the financial institutions, they bargain you down to 30 to 40%. So start from 200%. So basically, you started with a price which was totally out of the blue, and there was never a meeting point. What they did, I came from the system. I came from State Bank of India. I came from the system, from within the system. I knew one thing, that in Indian corporate, in 1980s, late 80s, early 90s, in the Indian corporate sector or in the financial sector, there was no expertise about the derivatives. They had no clue. So the only tool that they had was bargaining. Because if a CFO or a finance manager is bargaining, you go and tell him 200%, he brings you down to 80% or 70%. He goes and says, okay, look, sir, I have been able to bring him down to this. And that was the only tool they had. So what I did was, I started very simply, explain to them the products, explain to them the structure, explain to them my cost price, how it is arrived at, and tell them my markup. In 6 months' time, I can tell you, we had 60% of the derivative market in India, and we made tons of money from India because we had the market share. I could go in any of the corporates or financial institutions and get deals done because of this very simple fact that I shunned stereotyping. I'm telling the story not to tell me that I was very good or all that. I came from the system, so I knew. To highlight how the stereotyping can develop from misconceptions and can impact your businesses. Once you get out of that, it can be it can change the circumstances. By the way, stereotyping is not all bad. For information, it does give you a general contour of the people, of the culture, of the people or a country. For example, let me give an example. Japanese are punctual and very polite. That's true. That's invariably true. So it does have its advantages, but totally relying on stereotyping can lead you to problem. The next slide, slide 9. I come to the next sign, understanding cultural practices. In a multicultural environment, a lot of misunderstandings can occur because common practices in one country differ from those in the other country. or the other cultures. I'm not standing in judgment about whether something is good in one and something is bad in one, whether you, I mean, I'm not judgment. But they are a product of circumstances in that country. They are a product of the history and geography of that country. And you need to understand that to give to be able to interpret it properly and go ahead with it. Let me give you. I told you I'm going to tell stories. Another story. In 1993, when I was in China, the chairman of State Bank of India was invited to Asian chair to the conference of the chairman of Asian banks to China by People's Bank of China and Minister of Finance. He had been my boss earlier, and I knew him. He was my mentor. The head office from Mumbai called me and said, "Can you please take care of him? He's coming there. It's the first time. His visit, first time in China." Okay. I knew that he is a Tamilian Brahmin. Those who are from Singapore or India will understand that. He was a Tamilian Brahmin and a very strict vegetarian. I felt that he cannot survive in a Chinese hotel. I suggested that he come and stay with me. He agreed. And I took care of the protocol because he was at the end of the day the guest of Chinese government. So I took care of the protocol with Ministry of Finance and People's Bank of China, explaining to them why. And this next day, the first day he went for, I asked him to have a breakfast. He had a light breakfast, and he went. He came back in the evening starved, completely starved. And he told me, he said that they did serve vegetarian dishes, but they were all communal. People were using the same chopsticks and the same spoon which they were using to eat to pick up food from there. I couldn't eat from it. Now, for a Tamilian Brahmin, strict Tamilian Brahmin, that was a complete no-no. There was no way he would eat it because the food was contaminated, as far as he was concerned. So fine, we gave him a good dinner, and we told him that from next morning, you have a good hefty breakfast and you come and have dinner here. He didn't have lunch or dinner that evening. So next morning, I was about to call Ministry of Finance, and I got a call from Ministry of Finance. And they said to me, they were rather pissed. They said to me that we made efforts to prepare vegetarian dishes for him. He didn't eat anything, and they were rather insulted. And it took me almost all of 40 minutes to explain to them the situation and say why, and why is it a custom there, why what has happened. And then we agreed on a compromise that you serve him a bowl of rice and you serve him a vegetable on a plate, and that's it, on a separate plate, so that he doesn't have to look at the communal bowls. The next 3 days passed off very well. There was no problem. Now, the point I make here is the both sides could not comprehend the normal practices in the other country. Common practices in one country can be interpreted very differently in another. And that is something which you need to know if you want to manage diversity in your workplace. For example, let me give you another simple example. In many cultures, nodding up and down, head up and down like this is yes. In many cultures, it's no. For example, in Eskimos, it's a no. So you are shaped by the culture you have grown up with. And this lack of cultural understanding is not confined to individuals only. Even companies with serious important business, international business, can do faux pas, which can cost them huge amount of money and huge amount of business loss. Another example, again, China. It happened before me. McDonald's wanted to expand their franchise in China in 1993. They came up with an ad showing a Chinese man on his knees in front of the counter in a McDonald's, begging the vendor to accept his discount voucher, which has expired, because they had used the discount vouchers to attract clients. Now, this ad was aired on the TV and everywhere, with the view that to promote that how popular McDonald's is. There was a huge cry of indignation. People were upset because in the Chinese culture, begging is shameful. The result was McDonald's had to not only withdraw that ad, they had to make umpteen apologies on TV and this and that for putting that ad up. They had to issue discount vouchers for next 6 months to attract the clientele. That's how it can. That's how much it can impact. So it is very important to understand that business practices differ, and they are influenced by the culture of the country that you have to work with, or people you have to work with of the country, people of the country you have to work with. Very simple fact is that the business practices in Singapore are quite different from those in Japan or in China or in Indonesia or in Vietnam or in India. If you want to enforce your own practices, you will have a difficult time. So you need to understand the business practices of the other culture, other country, and the do's and don'ts over there to be successful. When the next slide, cross-cultural communication. I think the two icons on the top explain the cross-cultural communication very well. Both are shouting. The communication is a big business buzzword today. Everything nowadays is about communication. Your product may be wrong, it may fail completely, but it will be blamed on communication only. But nevertheless, communication in a cross-cultural situation can make or mar any business venture that you have. It's a two-way street. On one hand, what you say and how you say. On the other hand, it is what one hears and what one he interprets. You have seen the examples I've given in say, for example, between the Greek and the American. That's how different, if you don't understand the culture, how different it can be. Social norms, because what happens is social norms govern the communication in a cross-cultural situation. They are different from country to country. They are quite different from country to country. They cannot be the same. Let me give you an example. In Asia, if you are addressing your senior or your elder, you will never call him by his first name. You will always use his family name and use an honorific, like in Japan, san, in China, Xiangsheng or Xiaojie, in India, Shri or Mr. If you call him by his first name, it will be a significant breach of etiquette. Whereas if you go in the USA, everybody calls everybody by the first name. Even the abbreviated form, like for example, Tom or Chuck. If you go and call Mr. David White as Mr. White, people will find it amusing and may even comment upon it, because they calling anybody white is considered subservient. The important thing is all communication occur within a context. Some cultures rely more on context, the nuances, the context of what you're talking about, and some rely more on words. Rules implicit in a society guide these perceptions. It's not, you grow up with it. A non-verbal behavior like the tone of your voice, the silences, the expressions, they all have a varying meanings in different cultures. The key to navigate this cultural divide is to firstly have some knowledge of the other culture if you are having communication with them. Secondly, and more importantly, and I actually do that a lot, check your own assumptions about the other culture. If I am talking to a Pakistani or a Chinese or a Japanese, I always think in terms of, okay, what do I think about them? Okay, this may not be true. The second thing is also think in terms of when you're talking to the other cultures, um, do they look more at the logic or do they look at more at the nuances and the feelings? And this is where the empathy comes into play. The other thing which is very important is the personal space. Personal space is something where in the West, for example, if you come too close, people don't like it. It might be invasion of their privacy. And people might be, people would say they don't like it. Can we have the slide 11, please? Zona. This is just a slide for information. I don't have any knowledge. In West, for example, the personal space is between around 1.5 to 4 feet. If you come closer, they are not happy about it. In Asia, since we live in more dense cities and more dense societies, it's less probably. I don't know. I don't have any figures for that. But this is also a very important feature. I have found it out from my personal experience in working with Americans and the Europeans and Chinese and Japanese and Vietnamese and all that. Next slide. The next slide is slide 12. In a communication, language, silence, and saying no are an important part of conversation, especially in Asia. If you're working in Asia, all these are important. Now, as a general rule, if you know the language of the country you're dealing with or working with, it's good. It's a good start. However, my personal experience is, unless and until you're living in that country, it's generally not required. Or unless and until you have to go there so frequently, very often, that you need it. Your business contacts are like that. If you spend 6 months or 9 months a year, then maybe you need it. But generally, I found that knowledge of the other country's language is good, but not important. The reason I say this thing, the language is a double-edged sword. A half-baked knowledge can lead to grief. There are many nuances in languages, particularly in Asia, which a foreigner may not be able to understand. If you plan to dive into a business discussion with someone and use that language, you need to be damn sure that you are good. Because my experience tells me that it can lead to some very comic situations or very unpleasant misunderstandings. In my stay in Japan and China, I lived in Japan for 4 years, slightly over 4 years, and China about 1.5 years. I learned both the languages and I could speak them with fairly good amount of fluency. But I never used them in my negotiations. I would use them to break the ice, to start the conversation, but never use them for negotiations. In our times, particularly those of us are working in Singapore, English is the most used language, and it is more or less universal now. The only problem with English, the business English now, is a lot of jargon has entered into it. A lot of big words have come in. And one of the things I know about jargon is jargon abhors vacuum. When you have nothing to say, or when you have a lot to hide, you use jargon. There are a lot of words like holistic, ecosystems, organizational DNA, architecture of the organization, and all these extra work, etc. These words have very little, it would be very difficult for other cultures to interpret unless and until you are a product of Harvard and Stanford. These statements are incomprehensible. I have sat in meetings myself, and for half an hour I wouldn't know what they are talking about because they're using all these big words. I have worked in Far East from 1980s, where English was not very common. It's still not very common. I learned to simplify my language. I'll give you another anecdote. I was in Shanghai, having a meeting with very senior officials from the mayor's office in Shanghai. And we were sitting in the meeting room, and I saw outside the window it had started to rain very heavily. I made the remark that it's raining cats and dogs, like it does in Hong Kong sometimes. There was a stunned silence, and one of the officers got up. She went to the window, looked out, came back with a very perplexed look on her face. She says, "No, it's not raining cats and dogs. It rains only water in China." I learned my lesson. That you don't use idiomatic English in situations where it's a non-English speaking people. I'm giving examples only of China and Japan over here because I think it's more relevant to people here. I can say the same things about people in Brazil or Spain or Mexico and Peru and all that where I've been to. From then on, I made it a point to use very simple English, very simple language, short sentences, so that people can understand. And just to give you a humorous touch on this, I would suggest, Ben, if you can put up the video clip of this is a discussion between Condoleezza Rice and George Bush. It's a hilarious. Can do?
Bear with me just a moment. It's just coming up.
It's hilarious. You'll love it.
Mr. President, Condoleezza Rice is here to see you.
Good, send her in.
Yes, sir. Good morning, Mr. President.
Oh, Condoleezza, nice to see you. What's happening?
Well, Mr. President, I have the report here about the new leader in China.
Great, Condi, lay it on me.
Mr. President, who is the new leader of China?
Well, that's what I want to know.
Well, that's what I'm telling you, Mr. President.
Well, that's what I'm asking you, Condi. Who is the new leader of China?
Yes.
I mean the feller's name.
Hugh.
The guy in China.
Hugh.
The new leader of China.
Hugh.
The Chinaman.
Hugh is leading China, Mr. President.
What are you asking me for?
I'm telling you, Hugh is leading China.
Well, I'm asking you, Condi, who is leading China?
That's the man's name.
That's whose name?
Yes.
Will you or will you not tell me the name of the new leader of China?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Arafat is in China. I thought he was in the Middle East.
That's correct, sir.
Then who's in China?
Yes, sir.
Yasser's in China?
No, sir.
Then who is?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir?
No, sir.
Connie, you're starting to piss me off now, and it's not because you're black, neither. I need to know the name of the new leader of China, so I want you to get me the Secretary General of the United Nations on the phone.
Coffee, Annan?
No, thanks. And Condi, call me George. Stop with that Ebonics crap.
You want coffee?
No.
You don't want coffee?
No, but now you mention it, I could use a glass of milk, and then get me the UN.
Yes, sir.
Not Yasser, the guy at the United Nations.
Coffee.
Milk! Will you please make that call?
And call who?
Well, who's the guy at the UN?
No, who is the guy in China?
Will you stay out of China?
Yes, sir.
And stay out of the Middle East. Just get me the guy at the UN.
Coffee.
All right, with cream and 2 sugars. Now get on the phone.
Hello. Rice here.
Rice, good idea. And get a couple of egg rolls, too, Condi. Maybe we should send some to the guy in China and the Middle East. Can you get Chinese food in the Middle East? I don't know.
I think that's done. I hope you enjoyed it. I don't know whether it's a real. I don't think it's a real. It must have been a spoof, but it's an interesting spoof. In conversations, silence also has a meaning. It can mean many things depending upon the culture and the context. Silence can convey information, it can convey emotions, contemplation, it can convey avoidance of conflict, and even defiance. In Asian societies, it's also a sign of respect. Like for example, in most Asian societies, it's very, very rare for people to speak up. So silence should not be taken as in West, mostly silence is taken as an acceptance. Whereas in East, you should not take silence as an acceptance. Look at the context and look at the nuances. And what is the context and what are the nuances? And then interpret. I'll come to it. You'll find another vital part of communication is how to say no or convey bad news. In the West, it is very straightforward. Uh, in the US, they are very direct about it, very brutal and direct about it. In Europe, there are shades of differences. Um, I have been in the organizations, both European and US organizations. I have witnessed firings, and I've done firings of my own accord, and I know what it is like. In Asia, saying no or conveying bad news is generally covered with cultural norms. Many factors come into play. When you're saying communicating a bad news, you may want to keep the relationship alive for long term. You may not want the other party to lose face. You may not want to harm the other party. So there's many things which come into play when you convey bad news. So a denial in Asia is generally very nuanced. As an example, I'll give you a slide which says 10 ways the Japanese can say no. Ben, please, slide 30. The Japanese would say it would be very hard to do, it's very difficult, I'll consider it, I shall give it careful consideration, we shall make efforts, all sorts of things. This is pretty illustrative of what pretty illustrative of what happens in most of Asia, particularly East Asia, whether it is Korea or Japan or Taiwan or China, Vietnam. I've seen this in my experience that you have to learn to understand how to say no. Because keeping face in Asia is very important. Asian executives will go to any length to not to lose face, to avoid avoid losing face. And that is very important when you have to say no. Because if you keep the sensitivity in mind, you might end up in a very win-win situation rather than a lose situation. And you might be able to create very long-term relationships because you have the sensitivity. I'll give another anecdote. In mid-1980s, I was in State Bank of India, Tokyo, and one of our major clients was Crown Corporation, which were a major car radio manufacturers at that time. They had 60% of the global market share. They had factories in many countries. I had helped them in financing, getting foreign currency financing in many countries, and also hedged them for foreign currency and interest rate risks. I saved them millions. So I was one of their, let's say, put it this way, star banker. After about 2.5 years, suddenly one day they offered me a job in their corporation as an SVP International Finance, which was a big deal. And to try to convince me, the CEO, Miyakoshi-san, invited me and my wife for a dinner to their house with his wife. Now, in Japan, being invited for a dinner to somebody's house with the wife is a big honor. It's not done. We went, we had a very nice dinner. They were very gracious. And then he took me to one of his art gallery where he had his, where he had paintings from all over the world, wherever he had been and bought. And then he said very ruefully at one point that I don't have any paintings from India because I've never been to India. After that, we went out for a walk in his Japanese garden, which was beautiful, like picture postcard garden. And there he pitched to me. Then he pitched a job to me, very Japanese style. We didn't talk about anything before that. And he said that one of the words which I still remember, he said was "ikura nandemo ii desu" in Japanese, which means salary is no consideration. You name your salary. I was in a dilemma because I had very little interest in joining a manufacturing company. I was in a financial institution. And I was already in discussion with Chase Manhattan Bank and Industrial Bank of Japan. I didn't know how to say no. We did our things, think it over and whatever. And then we went home. It took me 2 days to figure out. I had a Rajasthani silk painting, about 3x5. I had bought it on my previous visit to India. I got it framed, very expensive frame. It cost me a whole lot of money. Got it wrapped nicely, sent it to him with a note saying, "Thank you very much for your hospitality. My wife and I are grateful to you and your generosity." And I'm enclosing a painting which will complement your art collection. I am told that when this parcel was received at his office and when they opened it, he smiled very ruefully and said, "Mr. Mathur has just said that he will not be joining our company." I like his style. He's almost a Japanese. Now, the thing was that I had said no without saying no. We remained on very good terms. When I joined Chase Manhattan Bank, I did a lot of business with him because it was good for me because I was able to bring business immediately after joining. We remained friends almost all the way till I was in Singapore. He used to come here and we used to have dinner. I come to the last point of my talk. Can we have the next slide 14, Ben? Earning trust. This is my most important topic of the day today. Whatever I have taught is technical. This is beyond technical. It is not just a word. Trust is not just a word. It's the sum total of what we have talked about. Without trust, you will find it very hard to succeed in an intercultural environment. You have to earn the trust. And I have made a very controversial statement. There is a difference in being trustworthy and trusted. I quote Graham Greene that a man becomes trustworthy only when he's trusted. You can see, I mean, a man becomes trustworthy only when he's trusted and not before. So you can be trustworthy as a banker, you can be trustworthy as a teacher, as a doctor, but only when the other person starts trusting you, you are actually trustworthy. That's a very important difference because the sad fact in all cross-cultural interactions is that the initial interaction starts with mistrust and wariness because they come from different cultures with their own perceptions. It's very natural and it's very common. And my 35 years, I can tell you, it's very natural, very common. And it's up to you to earn the trust. It's up to you to earn the trust to prove that you're trustworthy. It takes time and it takes effort. In my experience, the key is honesty. The other person's interests, problems, and issues, if you keep that in mind instead of your own, you will go a long way. Being transparent to the extent possible. Look, in business, all of us know that you're not working for charity. You need profit to eat and keep your family. Every businessman understands that. As long as you're transparent in what you're doing, it will be accepted. Understanding the people and their style of work and not denigrating them. Different societies and different countries are at different stages of evolution. in business. If you want to do business, then you have to accept what their systems are, what their positions are. As I said earlier, the way of doing business in Singapore is different from way of doing business in Vietnam or India or China. And you have to accept that. If you don't, then you will not get anywhere. The last and most important point I'll make is, if you really want to succeed, you have to show a genuine desire to help and work together. If you're simply there for your profits, people know that you are there for your profits. But if you show them that you are there for your profits plus to help them and improve them, they will come a huge way. And I have found this to work in my entire career, considering that I've worked as far as Chile and Romania, Croatia, or China or Japan. I'll end this talk with another anecdote. When I went to China in 1990, I had two sets of clothes. One was the typical investment banker attire, tailored suits, tailored shirts, tailored monogram shirts. Excuse me. And brand name ties, which I used to wear when I used to meet with the CEOs and CFOs of the S&P 500. I had another set of clothes, which was off-the-rack suits, off-the-rack shirts, off-the-rack ties, no cufflinks, which I used to wear meeting my Chinese clients. Because coming from the Indian background, State Bank of India background, they don't have the money to buy what I can buy as an American banker. And if I go them flashing my clothes and flashing my my prosperity, I set them back. But if I go looking like them, I am half accepted straight away. Second thing which I did was that I used to spend hours whenever I had a business to do, business deal to do, or a new product to sell, or whatever it is. I would spend time with them going over the structure, the pricing, the modalities, where to look for it. So much so, I earned the nickname of Jiao Shao, which is, I believe, if my pronunciation is correct, professor. The basic thing was I never criticized them, I never patronized them. Now, here comes the crux of the story. In 1994, my chairman, Tom Lebrecht, and the Chase's largest shareholder, David Rockefeller, came to China. And we were going through our usual meetings, and suddenly one morning I got a call from People's Bank of China telling me that all your meetings are cancelled. You are having lunch at 11:30 with People's Bank of China and Ministry of Finance and Bank of China. Now, in China, that was very normal at that time. So we piled up into that restaurant where we were supposed to have lunch with them. Lunch was hosted by the vice chairman of People's Bank of China. There they said that, look, China we are trying to review our policy about the convertibility of yuan and our trade policy. And we would like to have the help from Chase. Can you please, you have the experience in having dealt with in other countries. Can you please depute your senior managers or some senior manager from New York anywhere to help us? But we wanted to be very confidential, which was understandable. Now, immediately we realized that China is placing a huge amount of trust in Chase. They are basically asking us to help them on a policy decision. And for us, it was a gold mine. You can imagine, as a banker, if I know what the policy is going to be in 3 months' time or 6 months' time, what I can do with it. David Rockefeller turned to Tom Lebrecht, and they had a less than 1 minute discussion. I don't know, because I was slightly far away and I was taken aback. Then David Rockefeller turned to the vice chair and said that I would like to nominate Mr. Mathur. He is very well versed in foreign exchange. He's from our derivatives group, and he knows foreign exchange, and he knows about all these things. So he can help you. And Mr. Lebrecht, our chairman, would help him out with any background information that you want, that he wants, or that he needs. And we think that if we do it this way, we will be able to keep the confidentiality and keep it from leaking out. The three Chinese gentlemen got up from their chairs. They looked at each other. They excused themselves. They went behind the screen, talked over for a few minutes. They came back. And then the People's Bank of China and vice chair said that, I think we know Mr. Mathur quite well. I think it'll work. Now, that was for me like a license in China. I went on to do the advisory. It was very confidential. For the first time in 25 years, I'm speaking about it. It was very confidential. To the extent that every 1 week we used to meet in an afternoon in hotel rooms, private hotel rooms for lunch. I wouldn't tell my staff where I'm going. I will not take my official car. I'll take my taxi, the Hungbao Chicha, and I would go there. One day, my wife asked me, "Hey, what is this happening? You disappear in the afternoons after lunch, and nobody knows where you are." And I had to tell her what I was doing. This was in September. In December, I saw in a newspaper announcement that almost all the recommendations that we had made in that group were accepted as a policy by the Chinese government. Now, the point I'm making over here is not what I did or what I explained to them. It's a validation of what I have said about the trust. They felt that I am trustworthy. My reward was a lunch given by People's Bank of China vice chair, and I was presented with a copy of a coffee table book, which was the history of currencies in China, going back to 2000 BC. I still have that. If you want, anybody wants, I can show it to you. If Ben opens me up, I can show it. It was my prized possession because that was something I really liked. Here, this is the end of my presentation. I hope I was not too boring. I hope I did give you some insights. And I'm happy to answer any questions. If anybody wants to see that coffee table book, I can take it out from my bookshelf. Thank you very much for being so patient. I'm done, Ben.
Thanks very much, Pradeep.
Over to you.
We'll pause here now to see if there's any questions that anyone would like to raise. Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask the questions directly, or if you'd rather, you can always type into the chat. We'll pick it up from there. So I can see that we do have quite a few questions that are coming through.
Okay. I'm honored. Let me get the. It's all done very Chinese style. Is it visible?
Yes, I can see it. It has come up.
And it's in Chinese, so I can't figure out what it is. This was my present.
To translate is your retirement job.
Taking 2 lifetimes. It gives the history of Chinese currency.
if we go through some of the questions that people have raised, the first one is, in the UK, Indians are doctors. I've lost count how many times I've asked that, and I think that's from Kogi.
Yeah, that
Certainly
was
in the UK, there are stereotypes that
stereotyping.
exist.
An example of stereotyping. You asked if there was an example of stereotyping. And that is in response to that.
However, the next
in terms of the Indian engineer walking in.
No, I'm saying when you were talking about stereotyping, like you said, in Singapore, they'll think he's a software engineer. And in England, they'll say he's a doctor.
Okay, that I can understand. And if you go to USA, it will be banker.
Possibly.
Now, the next questions raised is, what is the most challenging cultural group you've done business with, and why did you find them so?
Cultural group. Frankly, as an Indian, almost all the cultural groups I found were very challenging. Japan was my first experience, so it was challenging. It didn't, but then Japanese are very cooperative. China was difficult. China was quite difficult. Singapore was even more difficult because at that time, I'm talking of 1980s and early 90s, they were really risk averse. India was very difficult, though I was an Indian. Some of the most difficult I found were, you'll be surprised, Vietnamese. Because they had just come out from the Civil War, and so there was not that much of experience, and that was actually true in China also, because one of the things which I found in China, and when I went there was no middle cadre because of the 60s and Mao's campaigns. Most of the people who were of that age who came into the middle cadre had been sent to the big farms and the countryside rather than in schools. So they had a huge gap in the middle level executives. That was very difficult. Vietnam was almost similar. Very surprisingly, I found Malaysia quite difficult. Outside Asia, I don't know, if you want to know, I can tell you about outside Asia also. But Brazil was easy. Colombia was easy. Venezuela was very difficult. Mexico was okay. Chile was very difficult. Serbia was very difficult. And when you look at these countries, mostly you find very autocratic governments over there. So I spent a lot of time in East Asia. I would say in that environment, I found China in 1990s, it was very different from what it is today. And it took a lot of time, lot of efforts. Vietnam also in late 90s and early 2000 was difficult. Malaysia was difficult for a very different reason. In Malaysia, the decision making is very nuanced. Germany was difficult for very different reason. Germans considered to be very straightforward, but they're very bureaucratic. Anyway, I mean, that's my impression.
And there's another question that goes with that is, what is your opinion on the way we have transitioned to video, audio communication over computers? Are face-to-face communications still necessary in the modern business world?
Look, I do not know the person who has asked this question, but I belong to a different generation. My very strong opinion is there is no substitute for face-to-face interaction. One-to-one interaction, face-to-face interaction, all this technology is fine. It facilitates things, it speeds up things. If I can come down and meet with, I've seen Andrew Bell or I've seen Ben, and I've seen Kogi and all. But if I can meet with them, things would be very different. And in business world, I don't know, maybe in 20 years' time, it will become norm that you see each other on computer screen. But in business world, if you want to develop trust, it has to be face to face.
No, I think as I share some of the stories that I've had in my industry, I'm in the aviation industry, and it's a shame that over the past year over a year now, that we haven't actually been able to go and travel to see a lot of our customers. Now that's a bit of a shame for many reasons. Firstly, we should be taking advantage of that. But not only that, we've actually been able to prove that there can be a transition. But certainly to echo some of the points that you've made, Pradeep, I think we do rely on that human interaction, and a lot of business transactions are conducted over trust. It's more difficult to trust somebody if you cannot see them, look them in the face. We still believe that, but it's part of the human nature. But it certainly has challenged norms, and I think that over the past couple of years, or the past year and a half, we have had to challenge ourselves into finding new ways of conducting business. So this is quite a timely reminder of that, and to be aware and more sensitive of different cultures.
As I said, the webinars and all that, the technology has facilitated things, but has it replaced? I doubt it. Maybe I'm wrong. I speak to my friends in investment banking, much junior to me, and they say the same thing. That when you have to clinch the deal, it's best face to face.
No, certainly. I think that's a very timely reminder on that. Right, I think if that concludes the questions, we've had a healthy discussion today, and we've had a good couple of speakers to come through. I'm going to invite Andy to come back and help close the session with us. Andy, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pradeep. That was a really interesting talk. I also, maybe I'm not quite your generation, but I'm catching you up fast. I also think face-to-face is quite different, and I really look forward to the time when we can have our events live and with an audience, and we can do visits again. I hope that's coming sooner rather than later. So thank you very much for a very interesting talk, and thank you to Nick for a very interesting starter and primer on Python. Now I'm going to hand over to Kogi to give a final address to us this evening. So Kogi, over to you.
Yeah, well, I found, for instance, Nick's talk, I was really getting interested in and was disappointed when he said, oh, I've come to the end of it. So I see there is definitely future talk in there. That was my impression. And on Pradeep, I know him a bit more than you guys do, so I found some of the anecdotes here which were really interesting. And the one lesson I have learned, I put it as the last comment, it's not only important to learn about the country you're going to, but if you're having a guess, you got to learn about where they are coming from, like this Tamil visitor to China. I would have never thought to learn that part. I mean, the Chinese did their best, and they put their best foot forward, but it was wrong. That's the learning point I've taken from Pradeep, in amongst others. That's one stands out. Okay, I'll thank them all, and Andy, yourself, Ben, and Pradeep, and Nick, and Jarrell is gone. It only remains for me to say is that our club, if you like, or the institution cannot function without input from our members. And in that context, we are always looking for people to volunteer as observers, as Andy said right at the start, giving us leads to either speakers or visits. This is not a plea for you to actually do anything except for tell us that I think there is a potential visit here. go and explore. We'll do the legwork. All we are looking for is some pointers. And with that, it's been a long evening, so I'll end here. I can put my email address and my handphone on here in case somebody wants to come back to me later. And that's it, really. And thank you again to all.
Thank you very much, Bhushan. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you all very much indeed. So it's good night from all of us, and see you at the next webinar, next event. Good night.
Good night.
Yeah, good night. Hi, Andy. So it was.
Trying to put your video on, Kogi?
Okay, yeah. My WhatsApp was buzzing, so I missed a fair bit of the chat. And because I'd spoken to Pradeep before, so I had some idea of what he was going to say. So, but I missed some of the anecdotes, which are very interesting.
Good. I could certainly identify myself with many of the points that he made.
Yes.
Of course, I've never been in such senior meetings as he has, but I know what he was talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, there are points he made which I make whenever I talk to the students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it's a matter of just getting it across, really. You can talk till the cows come home, but if you don't get it across, then it's no good. Anyway, it'd be good to see if anybody. Yeah, there is no comment as such as to what the thought of Pradeep's talk, as far as I can see. Well, I guess there were still most of the people at the talk at the end, so that says something, rather than them leaving.
Yeah, there were 25 participants in total.
Yeah. Okay. Right. How many are still on the line?
Still a few. So has anybody else got anything to say? Otherwise, I will let you go, you guys.
Okay. Okay. Okay, the three